Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute. My name is Art Alvarez with MortgageWorks, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Coming to you from Palm Springs in the greater Coachella Valley area. Had a little bit of a cool down here in the last couple of days, and I guess we got another weather front coming in over the weekend. Of course, we have our President's Day weekend coming up, so that's good. And hey, did you check out that Super Bowl? And this is where I say yawn. As Jeff just put up, yes, I did predict the Seattle Seahawks would win the game, and of course they did. It was really not even close. It was amazing how we went through three quarters and New England hadn't even scored yet. So yeah, it wasn't the best of Super Bowls, that's for sure. And I'm not even going to touch, that the whole halftime issue and somewhat little bit of a controversy there. I'm all about the game. I've never been into, the halftime show, a 20-minute show. It's, in my mind, all about the game. So that's why I say, folks, that if it were up to me, I'd always take a 7-game World Series over a Super Bowl because too often a Super Bowl can end up being one-sided and it's just not much of a game. And in terms of other sports news, I suppose, as I've been mentioning, we are now at the point where pitchers and catchers are reporting for Major League Baseball, so I'm excited about that because I am a baseball guy, as I've explained. So that's fun. And of course, I'm also a auto racing fanatic. And this weekend, NASCAR, the Daytona 500, will be happening on Sunday. I've been to that event in the past. It's really an amazing event. NASCAR is not on the top of my list as to auto racing. I'm more of a Formula One and IndyCar guy, but still, as to NASCAR, that is their premier event. So if you have nothing else going on this weekend, I recommend you take a look at it. It can be quite the event. Oh yeah, and as Jeff just reminded me, we still got the Winter Olympics going on, so that's fun to watch. I try to get as much of that as I can. It's fun to see us competing on the world stage. So lots to going on there on the sports world. And yes, curling. Yeah, I still have to figure out how curling really works, but I have to admit, particularly like when I'm at the gym on the treadmill and they'll have some of the Olympics on, I've seen curling now a couple of times. It's amazing how intense the competitors get in that sport. So I'm sure there's a lot of strategy there that I do not yet understand, but it's fun to watch and to see how serious they are, and they take it serious, and as any competitor, as any athlete should. So with that, let's go ahead and get into what's going on in the bond and mortgage market. The first thing we always do is bring up our rate grid, and it's just more of the same, and it's good news. Rates are very well into the fives. We're pretty much in the fives across the board. Conforming fixed 5 3/4. Look at FHA. I mean, well, actually, on this grid, I've updated it since. We had some improvement this afternoon, which we'll show you in the bond chart. So even though you see FHA on this, we printed this earlier this morning at 5.5. It's now at 5 1/4. And same with the conforming. It was 5 7/8 earlier. It's now 5 3/4. And the other thing I would point out on the 30-year fixed jumbo, that's down to 5 3/4. Again, I made those adjustments not long ago after the bond market took a dip. And that 7/1 arm also improved midday. We're now down to 5.5. So take a look at our website when you get a chance, and you'll see the rates there are a little bit better than what we're showing you here on this chart that we printed earlier. So let's look at the bond yield. We always provide you a 5-day chart of the 10-year Treasury bond yield. Again, that's your best barometer as to the direction of mortgage rates. It's not always going to be really closely aligned, but pretty close most of the time. And you can see there the kind of trend that we like to see, including Jeff's favorite Wednesday dip. Then it kind of kicked up a little bit late Wednesday going into this morning. And then look at that nice drop off late in the trading day today after getting close to 420 down to 410. So again, that's why on our rate grid, I made some changes literally just about an hour ago to reflect those changes. We try to keep that updated. So as a consequence, as you can see, rates are, again, getting pretty darn favorable and should be helpful to those home buyers who've been on the fence about buying and worrying about the affordability of the cost of their financing. I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. So let me give you a few data points, excuse me, as to what has been going on in the markets, in the financial markets, and as to the U.S. economy. This week, it's about jobs and inflation. And of course, the big news of the week is the jobs report that came out. And as it shows here on the slide, it was a blowout report, as we say. 130,000 new jobs, more than, it says double, more than double. The forecast was 55,000 jobs. And the unemployment rate dropped from 4.3 to 4, from 4.4. So that's obviously very good news. So all the recent, hand wringing and concern that maybe the job market's starting to look faulty and maybe getting weak, this number just blew that idea right off the table. And what's very interesting about this jobs report, I'd read somewhere that some folks thought, oh, that's just people going to work at 7-Eleven. No, this jobs report showed broad growth in a variety of industries, healthcare and so forth, construction. So it's a strong report. It's a broad-based improvement in new jobs. And so definitely that is good news. Now, there's some concern that, oh, gosh, with a strong jobs report, that might be bad for interest rates. Because remember, I've said before, unfortunately, a lot of times bad economic news is good for interest rates. I suspect that's not likely going to be the case. And we already can see that, as I just mentioned, on our rate grid. So please take a look at that, and you'll see that rates are actually still looking pretty darn good. Another number that came out today was really kind of disappointing. Existing home sales, forecast to be 4.15 million, was 4.35 million in December. So it was forecast to drop. Well, guess what? It dropped, but to 3.91 million. So below forecast, and a good, a pretty significant drop from December. And that's really kind of strange, because remember, not long ago, when our the feds, our Trump administration, announced that they were going to make sure that Fannie and Freddie bought just a boatload of mortgage-backed securities. Well, the initial impact was to bring down rates across the board by a good eighth of a quarter point. And the media was cheering the fact that rates were now under 6%. Well, since then, rates have creeped back up. In fact, Freddie Mac's most recent weekly news release about rates, I think they announced it was around 6.2. And of course, again, I'll keep reminding you, that's what Freddie Mac says. Look at our rate grid. We've got better rates than that. So don't believe the over 6% if you've got a good down payment and a decent credit score. What's going to happen tomorrow is the CPI. That's a consumer price index. The January forecast is for an unchanged number at 0.3. That's the monthly inflation number for CPI. And then the year-over-year forecast is a drop to 2.5, and it was 2.7 previous. So when you look at that, if that proves to bear out, if those numbers end up getting met tomorrow, I gotta believe that's going to be a good, a good help toward keeping rates not only where they're at, maybe even getting a little bit better still. And it would be great if we can see that 4.10 yield on the Treasury bond get a little bit better tomorrow, and then going into next week, it would be really great if we can see that 10-year bond yield get under 4%. So it looks like it's getting around the corner there. So stay tuned. And of course, for those of you who I've convinced to keep track of that 10-year bond, check it out tomorrow. Check it out next Tuesday. Monday's a holiday, so there won't be an open market for Monday. But keep looking at that. And if you start to see the 10-year bond yield approaching 4% or below, I can assure you that means mortgage rates are probably going to be looking even better than they are right now. So with that, the first thing I'm going to do, we typically go into a product spotlight. And I'm not really going to spotlight a product this time. I'm going to spotlight basically an update to a phenomenon that I don't like. I've been very critical of, and it's going to change very soon. So I want to give you an update on trigger leads. Because I still find a lot of folks out there, including people that we've started processing loans for, are really not aware of what this is all about. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to review it again, and most importantly, give you some good news about how this practice is going to be greatly restricted in less than a month. So first of all, let's talk about what are trigger leads. Well, as you can see, they're on the bullet point. They are considered a marketing tool that are used by lenders and financial institutions to gain potential customers. Okay, that sounds, like a positive thing, right? Well, not necessarily. Let me show you how the trigger lead works. And when I show you this, you're going to be a little surprised, I think, uh, based on how this practice has evolved. So when a customer applies for a loan, their credit report, of course, is accessed. The credit bureaus then sell that borrower's information to other lenders, other originators, as a trigger lead. And this can result in the consumer receiving multiple unsolicited offers shortly after they've applied for their loan and gotten their credit report pulled. Now, I will tell you, it's not just multiple unsolicited offers, it's dozens. It's dozens and dozens. I've had a couple of customers recently tell me they've gotten contacted over 100 times by originators. And of course, a lot of those cases, they're using very high pressure tactics to try to convince that borrower, oh, no, you're not in good hands. You should cancel that application, move to us. We've got a better deal. And so, as you can imagine, some of those sales pitches can tend to be a little bit light on the truth as to what they can really offer. But boy, I'll tell you, they make it sound good. And, in some cases, it's going to be too good to be true. But then the point of it is these multiple unsolicited offers are extremely numerous. They're very high pressure, almost to the point of just outright harassment of this poor borrower who had just already applied for the loan. Now, the whole, backdrop of why this practice even got put into place is the argument is the federal regulators want to encourage mortgage borrowers to shop around, to do comparison shopping to make sure they're getting a good deal. Sure, that's a lofty goal. That's a worthwhile goal, right? However, my argument is when a borrower has made their decision to apply with a particular originator and have their credit report pulled, you have to consider, I think you have to assume they've already done their rate shopping. They've made their decision of who they want to place their loan with. And so after they've made that decision and they've applied with that lender and they've had that credit report pulled, and in a lot of cases now, they have to pay for that credit report up front because they've become so darn expensive. It's unlikely that at that stage they're going to want to then step back and start over with the comparison shopping. So that's where I think this whole approach, while intended to be for a good purpose, has turned out to have an unintended consequence where the borrower is really simply being harassed. And unfortunately, a lot of times by unscrupulous, hard to say that term, originators who really certainly are not giving them the full story up front and trying to reel them in. And then, of course, a lot of times you're going to get the bad news later on that maybe that offer wasn't quite what you thought it was. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to, actually, let me point out before I get to the exceptions. The next thing I want to point out to you is last September 5, 2025, the Home Buyers Privacy Protection Act was signed into law. Yes, it was signed into law by President Trump. And this new legislation is going to greatly restrict what's been going on. So starting, as it says there, March 4th, 2026, many users of mortgage trigger leads will be banned under amendments to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So I cheer this. I think this is a great thing. It had broad bipartisan. That's kind of a rare word to hear these days, right? In the political arena, this had wide bipartisan support, and it passed pretty easily, and it has been signed into law. So starting March 4th, most of this practice is going to, frankly, go away. Now, there's a couple of exceptions, and they are that if the lead is used for a firm offer of credit and or insurance, and the recipient has consumer authorization or an existing relationship with the consumer. So essentially what that's saying is if you're going to pursue one of these borrowers as a trigger lead, you have to provide a firm offer, something that's not going to change, and you have to have their authorization, and you have to have an existing relationship. Like if I had a borrower who I had made a loan for before, and then I find out they've had their credit pulled, I can go back and talk to them again. We don't do that anyway. I have never, ever believed in purchasing leads. In fact, that comes up with our last bullet point. What is this really going to target? It's going to restrict. There's a pool of companies out there that can access and use trigger leads. A good amount of them are what we call third-party lead aggregators. I get calls and emails all the time from these third-party aggregators who are trying to pitch me on the idea of paying them a fee per lead so that I can then take that contact data and call these people and try to convince them I can give them a better deal on their loan. I have never believed in purchasing leads, mortgage leads. We dabbled in that about over 20 years ago. I found it didn't work very well. A lot of the leads were not of high quality. A lot of the folks that we would contact had already made their decision, as I pointed out earlier. And so I just walked away from that feeling like that's not the best approach. The way we get our business is it's all about relationships, having relationships with realtors, with home builders. That's really, in my way of thinking, the best way to serve the mortgage customer out there. We're not going to buy leads. We never, well, we did briefly. We've never done that since. We never will. And so I think, and it's interesting when you read that last bullet, it says third-party lead aggregators and non-bank lenders. Translation, brokers like us. So in that respect, I think this whole process can and has given mortgage brokers as a group somewhat of a bad name, because a lot of those brokers out there have been highly aggressive, overly so, again, to the point of harassment. And I think, I just got a new deal we started here yesterday where I, got an email from the borrower last night going, why am I getting all of these calls and text messages and so forth? So I had to explain to her what I'm, going over here right now, which is why I thought it would be a good idea to remind you all of this practice. And again, the good news that you'll find after March 4th, it should be restricted to a great degree. So if you've been thinking about applying for a mortgage soon, I'm not going to suggest you wait till after March 4th. Time is of the essence. You should apply right away. At least this way you'll know what's going to happen if you do start getting calls. But just be assured that after March 4th, this phenomenon should go away to a great extent. And I think that's the right outcome for those folks who are looking to apply for a mortgage. So with that, that's our sort of product spotlight. I just wanted to let you know about the trigger leads and the legislation, and give you the good news is that whole situation is going to change dramatically very soon. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and have Jeff get back on here, because we're going to get into a kind of a deeper dive about some of the latest U.S. economic data and what that means for the housing market. Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Art. Hi. Hey, how you doing?
All right. How are you?
Hey, good. Congratulations on your pick for the football game. It was a little slow, but it wasn't unexpected, because let's face it, the Seattle Seahawks are known for what? Defense. And typically, it's going to be a low-scoring game. That's what it is. And if you just enjoy the game itself, I thought it was very good. So congratulations on the proper choice there.
Yeah, unfortunately, they were heavy. There were heavy odds that they were going to win. So when I placed my bet, I called my bookie, and he told me, "Yeah, you won, but you're not going to get as much as you had hoped."
Well, at least you didn't say you have to owe us, because it's they were so overbet.
Yeah.
I also want to point out, I have had the occasion, in fact, even this week, and I just had to set the recorder for curling. My wife is from North Dakota, and I found myself the other night actually engaging in watching curling live, and I'd never done it before. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually pretty intense. Those guys that are doing that brushing thing, I thought it was like with a broom. I mean, I can see that in the position they're in. If that thing snaps, somebody's going to get hurt. But just amazing athletes. So it was a lot of fun.
I think they brush the ice to try to slow down the disc. Is that what it is?
Well, they're making it slick to give it direction. They can actually maneuver the direction of that stone, they call it, or rock, whatever it is, and it's just big. And it's pretty amazing how they can maneuver that in there and get it to stop right on the dime. Like, I didn't understand that no matter how many of those stones on your team you have on that bullseye, unless you have it as close to the center as possible, none of those others matter. So it's kind of interesting. Like, I had to ask my wife, like, okay, you're getting excited. Why?
Well, does that mean when I go bowling, I can have one of those guys with the broom brush the bowling lane to try to affect the direction of the ball.
I like that idea. If they can run fast enough, I think that's not a bad play, Art.
I'll have to work on that.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of get into a deeper dive with you on this because there was a lot of data points this week that how is that going to help us? Well, because you've been the last probably 3 or 4 weeks talking about affordability, and it seems almost like everything is lining up to prove what you have talked about now for over a month to actually be coming true. And I just wanted to, kind of pick your brain at this and maybe take a little deeper dive if you don't mind.
Sure, let's do it.
So the first thing is, affordability shows itself in a lot of different ways, like, jobs reports. You just shared that 130,000 new jobs, inflation numbers. You talk about that. Unemployment claims down, interest rates, as you saw here, you shared it has an effect. Housing stock you talked about. You talked about days on the market, where if I'm a buyer and there's more, there's homes that are down the market longer, it seems to make it easier for me to negotiate. You've proven that. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I just want to discuss these and relate to them like, hey, is today better than it was yesterday when it comes to affordability?
Okay.
All right. So the first one is, we had that, and they call it, I like these terms, hot January jobs reports. There are 130,000 new jobs added in January, which was far exceeding expectations. When it comes to something like that, how does that tie back into the affordability piece that you've been talking about?
Well, it's interesting. That's a good question. And, this should sound logical to most folks. If you think about it, in terms of economic data, what would you think is going to have the most impact on housing? Because there's various data points we talk about all the time, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty obvious. What's going to affect housing, good or bad, probably more than anything else, is job creation. Because after all, if you want to buy a home, and especially at these levels where people have been complaining about high home prices and high interest rates, obviously, even if to the extent you want to agree with those descriptors, you're not going to have a chance to buy a home unless you're working, unless you have a job. And over decades, and certainly the decades I've been involved in this business, you can always see a direct correlation between job formation and what's happening to the job market, or I'm sorry, the housing market. And again, both good and bad. When we had the Great Recession of 2008, obviously there was a lot of job loss then. It affects the housing market. So that correlation is strong, it's real, and it's pretty persistent. And again, good and bad. So right now, the media has been kind of perpetuating this narrative that the job market's softening. It's there's been recession word thrown around here in the last year or so, year and a half, and yet the recession, while it looks like not job growth, but U.S. economic growth in general has been a little weak lately, and so forth. Well, if you look at the GDP numbers and then you look at this jobs report, it's not a surprise. We were what? We're basically in a 3 to 4% growth rate in the second half of 2025. So it's no surprise that you're going to eventually see this kind of number come out. And as a consequence, I argue this is a great predictor of the fact that I think we're going to see improvement in the housing market overall, simply because you've got so many more people who are getting added to the job market. And that, of course, is also seen by the unemployment rate, because part of this number, that rate dropped as well. So it's a direct correlation. And I think as a consequence, this is an optimistic number for the U.S. housing market going in later into this year. I think this is extremely good news.
Yeah, it's exciting to see that these are the type of numbers that are put in there. That, let's face it, when you have a job, you're probably more likely, especially for a secure job, you're more likely to make larger buying decisions. And you mentioned that, I think, last week when it comes to the durable goods. And these are things that are going to last us a long time, usually more expensive, that number was stronger. So I think I don't mean to shade you here, but you have been right on the money every time one of these. So I say, I should have bet on the Seahawks. I didn't, but from now on, I'm going with Art's predictions.
Well, the other thing I'd point out, one other thing I'd point out on the job market is I wrote this down because I think this is one of those subtle, subsets of this kind of report, is the number of part-time workers in this report dropped considerably by almost 500,000.
Wow.
Well, you go, well, wait a minute, why would that be good news? Well, generally speaking, if you have a drop of part-time workers to that extent, it usually is because of one of two things. Either they have found an opportunity to not just work part-time, but get a full-time job, or they already have a full-time job, but things are going along well enough. And this gets into the next slide. We're going to talk about wage growth, that they've had an improvement in their wage growth to where they don't have to work that second part-time job to make ends meet. So that was another little subtle part of this report that I think bodes well overall, not just for the economy, but for the housing market.
Yeah, I agree. Well, since you mentioned wage and earnings, $37.13 average hourly earnings. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's up 15 cents from December, which is outpacing inflation. How does this also add to that feeling of, hey, I can afford to buy a house?
Well, the key part of that number, because you might say, well, wait a minute, $37 an hour, is that, some folks would kind of, poo-poo that and say, well, that's, decent income, but it's not great, and it's not enough to afford the median price of a home in most markets. Well, yeah, but of course, keep in mind, this is an average number. The key part of this isn't really the hourly rate that you see there. It's what you have at the bottom there. Wage growth outpacing inflation. That's the key. And it always has been. At times, and of course, we all know that whoever's, running the country, whichever administration's running, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, there's a tendency, whoever's holding the office, at the White House, that they're going to take the credit for, when things are good. And they'll talk about, okay, wage growth is up. Well, that's only half of the analysis. Wage growth may be up, but 2, 3, 4 years ago, when wage growth was going up, if you didn't look at the inflation rate, then you weren't getting the full story. It was only recent years we had wage growth going up, but the inflation rate was at a higher rate. So overall, what was happening, despite the wage growth, the real rate of wage growth was negative because you were losing purchasing power because your wage growth wasn't keeping pace with the much higher 9% inflation that we saw 3-4 years ago. That has now shifted to where inflation is much more under control, and wage growth now is no longer behind the inflation rate or below the inflation rate. It's now met and now is exceeding it. Again, that provides more purchasing power. So if you see more people working, and those who are working are seeing an increase in their wages to the point it's outpacing inflation, what does that do? It's a direct improvement attack on affordability. It's making people be more able to afford current house prices and current rates. So it's all about that wage growth outpacing inflation. That's the key number.
All right, before we go to the next slide, how much of this becomes a mindset when you start stacking the things that you've talked about over the last 3 or 4 weeks and then today? How much does that help the mindset of the average person out there thinking, can we buy a home? Should we buy a home? Can we afford to buy a home?
Well, I think to answer that question, I continue to say, and I see that the problem is, you got to quit looking at those headlines. You got to, so even now, so many of the headlines are so negative. And, there's this talk about, a majority, all these polls, that a majority of people are not happy with the economy, that they think the economy is bad. Well, that directly conflicts with some of this data. GDP growth, the jobs report, the wage growth is outpacing inflation. Those are all good news. That's not bad news. That's all good news. So why is it that these polls are saying that all these people out there feel like things are awful? Prices have come down. Gas is down. I said last week, I went to the market and I could buy a 18 eggs for less than $5. So I ended up buying 2 packages. I got 36 eggs for less than $10.
You were hoarding. You're hoarding those eggs,
Well,
Art.
yeah, but the point is like, so when I see that just personally, and then see this data, because I look at this data all the time, I'm scratching my head going, why does everybody think things are so bad? So I think, unfortunately, and I don't want to get too much into that part of things, but I think the media, in terms of the stories that are written, and in particular the headlines, because I've argued many times, people are a little bit lazy. They have a short attention span. When you see on the news feed articles where it'll tell you how long it's going to take to read it, my theory is folks who see an article that may have some very important data that you should take the time to go past the headline and read the detail, the data in the article. Well, if that article says, oh, it's an 8-minute read, you're going to go next, because I don't want to spend 8 minutes reading it. I want to spend 1.5 or 2 minutes reading it. Well, of course, if you do that, you're not going to get the full story. And I think that's part of what's going on.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, let's talk about the next point. The next point is, and this was one of those things where could be very cynical to say, yeah, but all those people went to work at McDonald's or 7-Eleven or a convenience store. This shows something different, doesn't it?
Well, sure. I mean, look at it. Healthcare, of course, healthcare is a major industry anyway. And healthcare, guess what would you think of when you think of healthcare?
I'm thinking doctors, nurses, high-paid salaries,
exactly.
Anesthesiologists.
Exactly. Education and health, same thing. I make loans for a lot of teachers and administrators at schools and colleges. In most cases, there used to be this notion that if you're a teacher, you don't really make that much money. I would argue that's sort of an old-fashioned notion that's not entirely true anymore. I've made loans to a lot of teaching professionals, and God love teachers. We need them, and they're very they're an integral part of our economy and our country, and any country, and for that matter, they should get paid well. And what I'm seeing is, in a lot of cases, they are getting paid very well. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of teachers who are getting 6-figure incomes.
Wow.
And then, of course, don't forget, there's all this talk about the manufacturing sector, and the U.S. has lost manufacturing and so forth. Look at the construction numbers. So, and of course, there's been a lot of talk about the tariff strategy and our administration encouraging other countries to invest in this country. Of course, we got the whole issue about AI and all the data centers that need to be created and built. That's going to start to trickle through with some of these job sectors like construction. So that's why this report is so important. It's broad-based, and in particular, it's not jobs at 7-Eleven. It is high-paying jobs, as this chart shows.
Do you see? I'm sorry. Do you see this trending as far as a job growth continuing? Because you mentioned something there about the data centers. We're talking a lot of jobs that are necessary for that, very high paying jobs, electricians, plumbers, architects, you name it in that construction. Do you see those numbers in the next, let's say, 6 to 9 months only getting better?
Exactly. I do. I think the data is starting to show that. And so, yes, I don't think this is a one-off. I don't think this is an isolated issue. It'll be very interesting to see what the next GDP report comes out at. Our current president is he's very prone to exaggeration. I've heard him say on the news here in the last day or two that, he sees the Dow going to 100,000 before he's, termed out. That's an exaggeration, but I think I also heard him say that he expects to see GDP growth in upcoming quarters that maybe hit 7 or 8%. That could be an exaggeration too, but can we get to 4? Can we get to 5? With all that tariff revenue coming in, and all the other economic policies that have been put in place, and then don't forget, everyone's getting a pretty significant tax cut this year, and we're starting to see evidence of that. Now, I don't want to get into it's only for billionaires. I would push back on that. I don't believe that's the case, but I don't want to get into a political discussion about that. But the point is, I am a believer that if people get to keep more of their hard-earned money in their pocket, that's got to translate into greater economic activity, which of course translates into more jobs, more high-paying jobs, and wage growth that's going to exceed the inflation rate. All of that is good news, and that's all going to be a factor in terms of these GDP numbers getting better and better over the next several quarters.
It just feels like, Art, with the things you've been speaking about for now some time, like I said, last 3 or 4 weeks, and what we're talking about today, it's like the perfect storm. It's really good stuff, and I'm excited that you're sharing it with us today, and that you're kind of breaking it down a little bit more. Let's go to the next one, and this is another one. As far as the unemployment rate, take us through that.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, you did see there a while back it was down to 4, and then there again, I was talking about how the media kind of grabbed hold of the idea that labor market's getting soft. We're going to see more layoffs. We're going to see a recession coming, and you did see that number go up a decent amount. 4 to 4.5 is a pretty big jump, right? Mm-hmm. And then of course it settled down slightly, 4.4. One of the things about the unemployment rate I've always had a little bit of an issue with, and it can, I did go to school, before the war, I call it, and got a piece of paper that says I know something about economics. One of the problems I've always had with the unemployment rate is it doesn't take into account the fact that, the number of people who aren't in the market looking for a job. That group are excluded from this number, and it can skew the number. I think we have less of that now, and when you start getting back down to 4.3, and if we get down to about 4.0 as it was before, that's about as good as it can get. There is what's referred to as the natural rate of unemployment, and it's basically considered to be somewhere around plus or minus 4%. So with this kind of number trending down to 4.3, and I think it's going to get a little bit better in the next couple of months and quarters, if we get down back to 4 or so, and even, go under 4, well, we're at, quote unquote, at that level, you're at full employment, because you're never going to have zero unemployment. There's always going to be some portion of folks out there who are unemployed. And a lot of times it's not because they can't find a job. They just choose not to look for a job. So, we're heading in the right direction where we're essentially very near, if not going to be at full employment. And again, that's another positive data point that only is going to bode well for the economy. And, I want to go back real quick to something about the income numbers. Again, part of all the headlines you see about housing affordability is, these poor millennials and Gen Zs and so forth, that, the baby boomers have, sucked up all the housing supply, and, they've got higher incomes, and the younger folks just don't make enough money to afford today's, house price and mortgage rate. Again, I think that's a little bit of a headline narrative that's not entirely true. So one of the things I did is I just took a sample of a few of the loans we've done over the last several months, and just give you an example. One loan that we did here recently, ages were 32 and 29. Their income, married couple, $15,000 a month.
Wow.
Another couple, 24 and 24. Monthly income, $28,000. A single person, 36 years old, monthly income, $23,000. Another couple, 37, 35, combined income, $14,000 a month. Another one, couple, 29, 29, $18,000 a month. Another one, single borrower, 34 years old, $17,000 a month. And I, give you one more. Another couple, 34 and 37, $24,000 a month. Wow. Those kind of income numbers, I'm sorry, I would push back and argue, and I do. If you're making this kind of income, there is no reason why you shouldn't be buying a house now. And of course, these people were smart enough to say, yeah, it's time to buy. And of course, you heard the other recent headline here just a few days ago. Now the number of homeowners with rates below 3, about 20% of the total. Well, now the number of homeowners with rates above 6 are also, in fact, slightly above 21%. Wow. What does that tell you? People are finally realizing there's no point in waiting any longer. And the numbers are starting to bear that out. Yes, are there other folks, younger folks at these ages with this kind of income who still feel like they're not able to buy? Yes, but what I observe is those folks tend to have made different life decisions. They don't want to spend as much of their monthly income, these kind of numbers, toward housing. They'd rather spend less toward housing. They'd rather spend more on a couple of really nice cars, or that plus going on multiple vacations to very nice places, and not cooking at home, buying groceries that have come down in price, but going out to nice restaurants and having very nice meals.
Mm.
I don't want to come across as being critical of that, but those are folks who have these kinds of incomes and they simply choose not to spend or allocate this money toward housing and maybe cutting back on some of those other expenditures. That's a value proposition, a value decision they've made. But I think for a lot of folks, you ought to rethink that, because what do we talk about? If you kind of reallocate some of those dollars and put more of it toward housing, especially when you're at these income levels, what are you doing if you are currently a renter? You're taking your first step toward wealth creation, or at least much better opportunity to achieve wealth creation versus renting and then spending all of this money you're making elsewhere. Because though it is possible you can put a lot of this aside and build wealth just as much, let's face it, that requires discipline, and a lot of those folks simply don't do it.
Well, two things I want to ask you about. You just kind of go back in the archives just a little bit. Is you were saying that it sounded like the average age of the people you talked about are well under the average age of a first-time home buyer, which I think you shared a few weeks ago, that has now hit 40. You never mentioned any of these people near 40. I think the one you said 36, but everybody else was quite younger.
Oh, well, correct. Yeah, all these were basically the range from low to high was 24 to 37.
So, and the other part was, you mentioned about wealth creation. I mean, they've got to live somewhere, and rents have only shown to go up. And I'm just curious, your number from a renter to a homeowner, wasn't it like 30 or 40x the wealth creation?
40x.
40x.
Yeah. And again, the Federal Reserve studies this every couple of years, and you can look up the data. According to the Federal Reserve, the wealth creation achieved by homeowners versus renters is literally 40 times.
Wow.
And again, I've seen articles that, in the financial pages that some, probably young person who thinks they know all about this says, no. You can build as much wealth without owning a home. Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. You don't have to own a home to build that wealth creation. But if you're making $28,000 a month when you're 24 years old, you can choose to stay as a renter and build as much wealth as a homeowner, but you better take a good chunk of that $28,000 a month and put it into investments where you can build that wealth in a different way. I completely agree with that. My observation is, my belief is, most of those renters simply fail to apply the discipline to actually have that strategy and build that wealth. So it's possible, but in most cases, not probable, and the data supports that.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about what this means for the housing market when we layer all these things, because it says mortgage rates will nudge up slightly, but a stronger labor market may bring buyers off the sideline. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that's it. I mean, yes, there's already been, again, when the headlines try to attack this good news and say, well, wait a minute, it's not as good as you think. Why? Because, the Federal Reserve isn't going to lower the Fed funds rate because the job market is strong. Well, maybe not. But let's say they just hold steady and they don't do anything. You have to consider the fact that, could there be a slight uptick? Well, we already had a slight uptick. Remember when Trump said, hey, Fannie, Freddie, buy $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities, we saw rates drop by about an eighth to a quarter. Yeah. Well, that has already gone away. It's gone back up to around 6.1, 6.2. So that slight nudge upwards has already happened. But I would argue that even with that, if you're going to see that many more jobs, and if you're going to see that kind of wage growth that's better than inflation, what is that doing? It's creating more purchasing power. And then once people start filing their tax return this year and they realize, oh my gosh, I got a pretty darn good tax cut that I wasn't anticipating, and I'm going to get a pretty nice refund. You put all that together, I think overall, it's going to create more of the economic conditions for some of these families to be able to buy when they didn't think they could before. So that's why these numbers, I think, bode well overall, even if we have that slight nudge. And of course, when you look at our rate grid every week, we're still in the fives. And, when you consider the fact that, about 2/3 of the home buyers have rates below, I think it's 5%. Well, guess what? If you're anywhere over 4 in terms of current homeowner, between 4 and 6 on your current rate, so you don't have that ultra low rate. If you're between 4 and 6, there is no reason to stay on the sideline and not sell your home. And we've already seen more inventory. It's not totally back to normal, but inventory has grown. I think some of those homeowners who might be in the 4%, 4.5%, 5% range, they've realized that rate differential now is much lower or narrower. And so now they feel like the conditions are better to where, they can go ahead and give up their 4% rate, buy another, sell their house, buy another. And, with some strategies like we talk about, getting seller credits, buying down the rate, you can end up with a rate very comparable to what you already had in your current home that you're selling and achieve what you need long term. A better house, better suits your needs, like that case study we did last week where, in some cases, you need another home, you need another bedroom, you need a bigger home, so forth and so on. So the conditions there are there now where it makes more sense to jump ahead and do it.
Fantastic. I want to ask before we go off of this slide, because the experts were predicting a certain rate by the end of 2026. And we are right now so far below that. Do you recall it was like 6.5, 6 3/8, wasn't it?
Well,
it high number.
Yeah, most of the big players, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Mortgage Bankers Association, I think it's still the case, are predicting that by the end of 26, we'll still be right around a 6% market in terms of rate. And we're pretty much there now. So what that underscores is the fact that kind of what the slide says, those participants are of the mind that, rates are not going to get dramatically better, at least not for the next year, maybe 2 years. And, I tend to agree with that to some degree. I mean, I think we have a little bit more improvement that could happen. I think we could get lower into the fives. Like I said earlier, FHA, as of this afternoon with this rate, this bond market dip, we're at 5.25. But the point is that, we may see a little bit of improvement, but I would argue that even with that little bit of improvement, when you factor in, again, everything we've been talking about in terms of the more jobs, more people working, the increase in wage growth, the tax refunds that people are going to get, less tax hits on their income, that's going to a large degree, I think, offset even if rates do nudge up or stay kind of fixed where they're at right now. And so overall, I think you've got a great opportunity.
It just feels like the door is wide open and the windows are saying, come on in. So this next one, I just want you to kind of give us an overall recap of what you think. Because, you've been in this game for over 4 decades and you've seen things come and go. We've all been through COVID. We never thought that was going to happen. And now we have some really interesting things. So I'm just curious for those people watching, what kind of things can you share that you might say, hey, in the next 3 to 6 months to help them make a decision whether home ownership is right for them?
Well, a couple of things. Earlier we were talking about how the existing home sales came out today below forecast, 3.91 million. That's a little bit anemic. I mean, a year, it's more like 6 million. So we're not back to normal. But to see, in my mind, what that underscores is the fact that if you're a buyer or I should say prospective buyer, and you've been hesitating about moving forward with a purchase, if you look at that number, and then you look at all that economic data we just reviewed in terms of the number of new jobs, the wage growth, inflation's been under control, and hopefully tomorrow's number will support that even further. Inventory is up. The ratio of list price to close price is a little wider now. It's in a lot of markets is about 3 to 4%. So in other words, you're more likely to be able to negotiate a deal where you're going to buy a home at maybe 96 or 97% of the list price instead of full, at least unless you decide to go full and get that concession another way, as I keep talking about. So when you put all that together, it's becoming a buyer's market. Sellers are getting a little frustrated that their lofty, opinion as to what their home is worth hasn't played out, and they're being forced to consider concessions. Well, when you look at that, you look at more inventory. When you look at 3.91 million existing home sales, meaning not as many buyers out there bought as we thought would, you have less competition. You have more leverage as a buyer. And, better hurry up in the next 3 to 6 months, because that 130,000 new jobs, well, if those are new jobs, some of those folks are going to enter the housing market, and then you could have more competition. So jump on it now, take advantage of your own wage growth that has exceeded inflation. Look for that, tax refund, because your tax rate's going down, especially, you got the Social Security free from tax and overtime free from tax and all that. Put all that together, there's more purchasing power for prospective home buyers, more inventory, more opportunity to extract concessions when you negotiate. That's why in the short run, the next 3 to 6 months, I think you should be all over these conditions, and we can help that prospective buyer structure their transaction and their financing in such a way they can attack that affordability concern head on and be able to end up with a house at a reasonable price, a very good rate, and be on their way to wealth creation. So I think, I hate to say it, I know it's a cliche, but for a very long time now, you wonder about, is it the right time to buy? It really is. And people need to see that, ignore the headlines, and get out there, find a really good professional realtor who can assist you. And then we can help both of you put that offer together, that strategy together, and get into that home and watch your wealth start, growing over time.
I think that's great. Well, Art, just a real quick recap. These are things that you talked about. The 130,000 jobs created, far exceeding the forecast of 50 to 65. Unemployment fell to 4.3, lowest since July 2025. And I want to stop there for just a second. You said something about you have a paper that says you know a little bit about economics. When you have high demand and low supply, what typically happens to the price?
Goes up.
So if we have 130,000 new people working and we have fewer people to choose from, doesn't that add or bode to wage stability and growth?
Yep, sure does.
And we've seen that. So we see where the healthcare leads, 124,000 new jobs showing strength. So it's not just these low income jobs. The wage and hours up. The big thing that Art pointed out, which is very important, is outpacing inflation. So it's not just saying, hey, we're getting a raise, but it still doesn't meet inflation. So we're really losing buying power. This is where you're gaining that. And finally, expect slight mortgage rate increases, which today we saw go down, but strong jobs may attract buyers. I'm excited about that. Art, thank you so much. Those of you watching, this is so much good information here that he has just been stacking one week after another. Like, I own a home. I'm almost encouraged to go buy another home just because the conditions are so right. So,
yeah, exactly.
Art, thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
You bet.
All right. Take care. All right, folks. Well, thank you for watching and listening to this week's Mortgage Minute. I do want to give you one reminder for those of you who are first-time home buyers, or for those realtors, those agents out there, agents and brokers. If you are going to be working with a first-time home buyer, don't forget we are 12 days away from the period for the California Dream for All program, that 3-week period where you can get pre-qualified and get a voucher so you can have an opportunity to get up to $150,000 in down payment assistance. That would allow you to buy a home at $750,000 and have the California Housing Finance Agency give you that 20% down payment. So again, the window opens on February 24th. I can't stress enough, if you're a first-time home buyer or if you're an agent, broker working with a first-time home buyer, take advantage of that. Contact us so we can get you pre-qualified or get your client pre-qualified to get that voucher and have a shot at what is a terrific benefit, which will, of course, address everyone's biggest concern, the affordability of getting into home ownership. So with that, I'll conclude the show for today. Thank you for watching and listening. Enjoy your holiday weekend. Enjoy the Olympics. Enjoy that Daytona 500. And around the corner, we got baseball. And until then, I'll see you next week on the next edition of the Mortgage Minute. So long. Take care.